Hello, I'm Ted Morrissey, and this is a video from my long story and novella course. And today I wanted to base this video on Jean Rhys's Wide Sargasso Sea. I want to talk a little bit about what we could draw from this little novella for our own writing techniques, perhaps. And then just share some other kind of odds and ends with you along the way here. So just as I get started here, most of us read either the Norton edition or there are a few other paperback editions. The first time I read it, it was just in a real simple paperback edition. The Norton is obviously good for providing a lot of background information and critical response and so forth. For my money, it's almost too heavily footnoted. And what I mean by that is, footnotes kind of interrupt the flow of the story a bit. Obviously, one can kind of ignore them, but sometimes it's hard, and so we get drawn to the footnote. And I think sometimes the footnote is maybe a bit of trivia, but it really doesn't do much to help us understand the story. And in some cases, maybe explains things about the text, which is more than we want to know. I think I've said elsewhere that yes, this is a revisionist text. It revises the Jane Eyre story, which I had read in high school, Jane Eyre, that is, and liked it. But I didn't work on my master's until I was a bit older. So I was probably 30-ish or so when I first encountered Wide Sargasso Sea. And so I hadn't read Jane Eyre recently, and I'd forgotten a lot of the finer points, quite honestly. And so when I read Wide Sargasso Sea, there was more of a sort of mystery element to it that I really, really liked. But then later, because I was reading again an edition that didn't have all the footnotes and things, and then later I got an opportunity to teach the novella, and I wasn't able to find any editions to put on the list except for the Norton. So I went ahead and got the Norton for my students. And like I said, it's got a lot of great features. I like the Norton anthologies. I'm a fan, but I felt like having the sort of heavily footnoted text of the novella, sometimes the footnotes went further than I would have liked in terms of explaining things that had been sort of mysterious for me before, which kind of some of the mystery was taken out of them with the footnotes. But that's a whole nother issue, right? So I do want to talk about the novella as a sort of revisionist work. I know some of you are not keen on revisionist texts, not yet, but I'm working on you. But then also I want to talk about another feature of the text, which kind of revisiting an issue which we've talked about before in this course. Before I get to any of that, however, just for kind of kicks and grins, I want to share, speaking of different editions, I want to share this edition of Wide Sargasso Sea with you. I picked this up a few years ago. It's one of my prized possessions. It's the London Folio Society edition of the text, and it came out in 1993. But it's just a beautiful book. It's just, obviously it's got this as a cloth, but it's just obviously kind of mirrors the floating Sargasso that is the inspiration for the title. It's got green papers, and in fact, the text of the novel itself, it's kind of hard to see probably on the video, but there's a slight greenish tint even to the pages themselves. But what's really cool is there's a series of illustrations, which are by Chris Daunt. They are copper engravings, and there are several throughout the book, and I don't know that they necessarily add to the reading experience, much other than they're just cool. I like the look of them. But anyway, the hardcover edition. So I think it's just another testament to how well received Wide Sargasso Sea has been, and Jean Rhys has a lot of admirers, not just for that book, but for other work. She, as if you got the Norton edition and you read some of the background information, know she had a very kind of a uprooted sort of lifestyle, and was sort of an outsider no matter where she went. So anyway, just a kind of interesting person in her own right. But let me get back to what I want to kind of focus on, which I think are of particular use to us as writers. When we looked at Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, the main focus that I wanted you to consider was Hemingway's breaking of point of view. Most of the story, as you recall, is sort of in third person, limited omniscience of Santiago, the main character's perspective, but Hemingway breaks out of that from time to time, right? And we talked about the effectiveness of that, and so on. Obviously, now that you've read Wide Sargasso Sea, you can see that Jean Rhys takes that to a whole other sort of level, in that we have different narrative voices, right? First person, but different people, right? And it can be a little bit jarring. I think that was a word that came up on the discussion board when we're, looking at one thing, and then suddenly we realize we're somewhere else in some other different perspective or whatever. But I think it's highly effective here. Now, of course, she does it with these different major sections of the novella. And that is somewhat different than what Hemingway was doing, where we just have sort of insertions of a sentence here or a paragraph there. But it's something to consider. So when you write a story, do you always have to stay in the same voice? Can you write part of it in first person and then another part in third person? Can you write all sections in first person but have them be different people, as Jean Rhys is doing here? Yeah, absolutely you can. I didn't bring a copy of it. I wish I had. Well, I'm going to pause. I'm going to pause and go get it. You're going to understand why in just a second. Okay, I'm back, and this is what I wanted to share with you. And I had forgotten to grab it from my personal library. I've got a lot of books, and I definitely wanted to go get it because you'll see why. It's the Master's book, William H. Gass, Omen Setter's Luck, his first novel, 1966. Kind of set the literary world on fire. And actually, this is my prized first edition copy of Omen Setter's Luck. But I bring it up in this context. Let me put that back in the bag before any harm comes to it. But this is a really interesting novel in the context of what we've just been talking about, because it is a novel comprised of various sort of novella-length sections that each has a different speaker. So, for example, the opening section is The Triumph of Isabestus Tot, and so we get Isabestus's perspective on what's sort of the main focus of this novel, which is a character named Brackett Omensetter, and he and his family coming to this little town in Ohio in the 1890s. And then we have the love and sorrow of Henry Pimber. So we get Henry's perspective, and probably the greatest work of fiction in the English language. And I'm not even being like comically hyperbolic or whatever. I'm sorry, I got to get to the very beginning here because it's a long section. It is, oh my gosh, not quite there yet. It is a section that was actually kind of a late addition to, still not there. There we go. The Reverend Jethro Ferber's Change of Heart. In the Ferber section of Omensetter's Luck, which is the longest section, is just phenomenal, just absolutely phenomenal writing. I had fallen in love with the master before I read Omen Setter's Luck. But once I fell, then I had to read everything voraciously. And so when I read Omen Setter's Luck, I was, even more blown away. And then when I got to that last section on Jethro Ferber, oh my gosh, you need to read Omen Setter's Luck and particularly pay attention to the Jethro Ferber section. But again, I bring it up in this context because each different section of the novel, which each is sort of novella length, and the last part is the longest of them, has a different first person narrator. And they all have, different voices, different perspectives on the main events that keep kind of being returned to by each of the narrators, and so on. So, again, that's kind of what I wanted to mainly draw from Wide Sargasso Sea, was this idea of switching perspectives, and not as Hemingway had done it, with a sentence here or a paragraph there, but different delineated sections or chapters in different voices, and yet kind of all focused on the same central plot, and so on. Now, obviously, there are a lot of other examples out there. Different authors have done this over time, so I'm not implying that this is highly unique, but it's certainly worth considering as you're working on your own stuff. Okay, so revisionist fiction. As you may know, I know some of you know because you've taken some of my revisionist courses. I actually teach two courses in revisionist fiction here for Lindenwood. And actually, the other one is going on simultaneously with this one. I teach one course just in general with revisionist fiction, where we read some original texts, and then we read some novels and novellas that were inspired by those texts. And then right now I'm teaching my revisionist Shakespeare course, where we read Shakespeare plays and then novels that were written inspired by those plays, and kind of retellings of those stories and so forth. But revisionist fiction has been around for a long time. Now, some of you are fans, and some of you liked the revisionist aspect of Wide Sargasso Sea. Others of you, not so much. One of the comments that one will get sometimes is that it seems sort of like cheating, because you're taking somebody else's idea that they came up with and just sort of spinning off of it or whatever. Well, I would suggest that, for one thing, it's not quite that easy. If you try some revisionist fiction of your own, it isn't quite so simple. But the other side of that coin, I would say, is that all writing is revisionist in a way, meaning that anytime we sit down to write fiction, we are drawing from some sort of original text. Now, maybe that original text is the text of our lives. Maybe we, I don't know, went to a big music, day long or weekend long or week long, whatever it might be, music concert. And we had some kind of weird experiences there. And so we've got inspired. Now we're going to write a short story or a novel or whatever it might be based on our adventures at this big music, festival. Well, that experience is essentially a text, and we're using that as inspiration. We're drawing from that text, right? So everything we write, in a sense, is a sort of revision of an earlier text. I know I'm getting a little theoretical here, but just because one is drawing from a previous published text, well-known published text, that doesn't make it any less of an original creation than just any kind of writing that you would do. I mean, I mentioned Shakespeare. Heck, Shakespeare was a revisionist author, as you probably well know, that almost every Shakespeare play, maybe with the exception of one, was drawn from either earlier fictional work or earlier historical accounts, which are a type of fiction of their own based on the subjectivity of writing history, right? And so, anyway, even the greatest writer in the English language, by many people's accounts, was a revisionist author, right? And so, I wanted to bring in this too. We read Joyce Carol Oates earlier, and I think most of us, if not all of us, were big fans. And I was just kind of poking around the college library a couple of weeks ago, and I ran into this collection of interviews of the new fiction by John David Bellamy. I was a little bit familiar with it already because one of the interviews mentioned is the master, William H. Gass. And I'm very familiar with this interview. It's you know, available online, and it's in a collection of interviews just of the master, and so I was well aware of that one. But some of these others I hadn't been aware of, or I guess any of the others I hadn't read. But because of the fact we had just read Black Water, and I saw Joyce Carol Oates, I thought, let's check out what Joyce Carol Oates has to say. And this is, gosh, when was this published? Late 70s, I'm going to guess. No, 74. Okay. Oh, what? Sorry. Yeah, originally 74. Okay. So this is Bellamy interviewing Joyce Carol Oates, and they're talking about all kinds of things. It's all very interesting. But he asks her, "What are you working on now?" And this is the summer of 1971. And Oates says, I'm going to read kind of this whole passage, this whole paragraph. It's not super long, but she says, this summer, again, 1971, I am putting together a group of short stories called Marriages and Infidelities, which includes stories that are reimaginings of famous stories. For instance, The Dead, that's James Joyce, The Lady with the Pet Dog, Chekhov, The Metamorphosis, Kafka, of course, Where I Lived and What I Lived For, Thoreau from Walden, The Turn of the Screw, Henry James. And my thoughts are much with this book when I'm able to get them free of Wonderland. That's this other novel she's working on. She says then, if you would like to read The Dead, retitled by the editors of McCall's, it was published in the July 1971 issue of that magazine. The Turn of the Screw will be out soon in the Iowa Review. She says, these stories are meant to be autonomous stories, to stand on their own, yet they are also testaments of my love and extreme devotion to these other writers. I imagine a kind of spiritual marriage, quote unquote, between myself and them, or let's say our daemons, quote unquote, in the Yeatsian sense, exactly in the Yeatsian sense, which is so exasperating and irrational. So Joyce Carol Oates, as we know in Black Water, she drew from the text of history, the Chappaquiddick episode, and revised it into the story that became the little novel Black Water. But in this particular collection, by the way, I wasn't really aware of that collection. There are a lot of Oates to be aware of. And so I've actually ordered a copy. So I've got a copy of that collection coming my way because I'm particularly interested in those revised tales that are included in that collection. But again, using these earlier works for inspiration and reimaginings and so forth. And I like the way she talks about it. It's sort of a homage to these other writers, and I feel that way too as a revisionist author. I've revised Mary Shelley most frequently. I love Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I just love her story and her personality. I've revised Homer's Odyssey with a little Iliad thrown in there for good measure because I love Homer's text and those stories. I've revised Melville. In my little novella, Weeping with Ancient God, I do a little fictional biography of Melville and throw in a little bit of his Moby Dick along with his Typee and Omu and some other Melvillian texts in there. So it's just great fun to take some work and some writers that you love and just kind of spend some time, with them, for your own imaginings, your own writings, right? So anyway, I'll stop there. So again, just to recap, I would definitely encourage you to look at this idea of shifting narrative voices that Rhys uses so effectively in Wide Sargasso Sea, and other authors have done, like the Master in Omen Setter's Luck. And also, if you're not, familiar with revisionist texts, maybe give them another look and give some thought to if there's any texts you would be interested in trying to use as inspiration. All right, so I'd be interested to hear whatever you have to say about this video, and I will see you down the digital road.